Season 2 of Dead to Me picks up the morning after the events of Season 1. And both Jen and Judy are making breakfast, but they're completely frazzled. And immediately Henry notices the pool cover is on and asks why, to which the women both say that an animal died in there, but they don't initially agree on which animal. Although they eventually settle on a very big dog. When Charlie comes down, he says, wait, I thought Judy wasn't going to be in our lives anymore. You guys friends again? And while Judy's saying, yeah, I hope so, Jen's saying, no, she just stopped by to get her things. But then Judy finds out that most of her things were burned because Jen was pissed. Jen then drives Judy back to the nursing home, and as she's doing so, she's telling her, we can never talk about what happened last night. Judy is for that. She's agreeing with her. But Jen says, you would have a tendency to want to tell the truth. Judy says, yeah, well, I want to tell the truth to you because you felt guilty about killing your husband when it wasn't your fault. But at the end of the day, all Jen cares about is that Judy shuts her mouth. So she drops her off at the nursing home and Judy cleans herself up, and then she goes to her boss and asks if she can stay in Abe's old room. The issue with that is that they're at full capacity and they have a new resident moving in, so unfortunately not. Her boss says, wait, I thought you were staying with family. She says, yeah, I was until I wasn't. She says, well, you do have somewhere to stay, right? She goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. But she doesn't. And she goes to a supply closet and starts bawling her eyes out and stress eating. She then makes her way to Abe's room before that new tenant arrives and starts snooping around the bed spring. But she gets caught by that new tenant and her daughter. And the new resident's named Flo and her daughter's named Michelle. And they think it's pretty weird that Judy was snooping around, so Flo says, keep me away from her. But after Michelle was setting up her mom's room, she found what Judy was looking for. It's a box that has weed, keys, and a hand-drawn picture of Abe that Judy drew. And you could tell the drawing and everything meant a lot to her, and she gives Michelle a hug. She then goes to grab the car that those keys belong to, and it's Abe's old vehicle. Jen, meanwhile, headed back to her place and started cleaning up the pool area. She's also decided to take down the security cameras, to which the neighbor Karen comes over and sees. Initially, Karen asks if she wants to have wine with her later because Karen's husband's out of town, but Jen has no interest in that whatsoever. Then Karen says, wait, didn't you just get these cameras? Yeah, I'm not surprised you're taking them down. I like my security cameras a lot better. They can see the whole neighborhood. And when Jen hears that, all of a sudden she's got a hankering for wine at 11:30 in the morning. So Karen brings over the wine and they start looking over at how strong her security cameras are, but in reality, Jen's just looking at the previous night. She's seeing on the camera that sure enough, there's Steve showing up and there's Judy running out to his car and asks Karen, how often do you delete this? She goes, I never do. I just keep it on the cloud. And as she's watching the footage, all of a sudden Karen gets up because she hears something in the pool area and starts lifting the cover up. Jen frantically is screaming, what the hell are you doing? But it's too late. The cover's coming off. But when it does, Steve's body is nowhere to be found. And the thing that was making that noise is the wooden bird that Judy got for Henry. Later that day, she takes Charlie out for a driving lesson because he's been bugging her about it. But he's pretty good, and she wants to know why he's this good at driving. And he says, well, I was going on lessons with Dad. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you to freak out. But as they're driving, they almost get hit by a driver. And it was his fault, not Charlie's. And when that happens, Jen freaks the hell out. But in reality, it's just the stress getting to her. That night, while on the computer, she's looking at putting in a request to get a stop sign at that intersection, but she ends up at the ADT website looking at the security footage from her house the previous night. She doesn't get long into the footage because Henry's woken up with a nightmare. After she settles down Henry, she has a nice cry and heads down to the kitchen where she's pouring herself a glass of wine, but notices that Judy left one of her bracelets there. And Judy tried to get into the art gallery to no avail, and she's been receiving phone calls all day from an unknown caller, but not answering it. And with nowhere else to go, she's sleeping in Abe's car in her dentist's parking lot when she gets a phone call from Jen. And Jen tells her, if I didn't know any better, I'd assume that you were just leaving stuff here so you could see me again. Judy says, well, is it working? And yeah, it is, because Jen's not going to let her sleep in her car and invites her over to watch The Facts of Life. But they start having a cry about what happened the previous night, and then it leads into Steve for Judy. And even though Judy knows it's ridiculous because they weren't dating, she's still broken up about it. And that's when Jen gets a flashback of what really happened the previous night. Steve came over, and she did pull a gun on him, but as Steve goes to leave, he starts insulting Jen, saying, I see why Judy took pity on you. You have a dead husband who was cheating on you. He seemed miserable, by the way. And when he says that, she takes that wooden bird and starts smashing him in the head. So Jen actually didn't shoot Steve at all. But with Judy crying in her arms, she can't bring herself to tell her the truth because she's perpetuated this lie that Steve came at her and started choking her and it was self-defense when it wasn't. The next morning, Jen asks Judy if she wants to stay there because once again, she has no place to go. And when the kids come down, Charlie notices that they're back to being friends again, but also says the girl named Parker is going to be driving them to school, which immediately Judy starts joking with Jen that the two are doing it. But then there's a knock at the door. And when the women go to answer it, to their utter surprise, there is Steve standing there in the flesh, not dead. But in episode 2, you learn it's not Steve. It's Steve's semi-twin brother, Ben. And he's basically the exact opposite of Steve. He's a non-douchebag chiropractor who's a divorcee with a teenager. And overall seems like a really nice guy, but his arrival has freaked Jen out to the point where she actually faints. Don't worry, Jen, I was fooled too. And he's shown up at Jen's place because Steve is missing, and every night he calls his mom, but he hasn't called in a while. And on top of it, the FBI came around looking for Steve. So he wants to know if Judy has seen him, but she says no. Ben then gets a text that Steve's office is being raided by the FBI and heads out. And when Jen gets Judy alone, she lashes out at her for not telling her that Steve had a twin brother. But she's also very concerned about the FBI, and Judy admits that it's probably her doing because she turned Steve in for money laundering. And Jen is really pissed off at that, but what was she supposed to do because they were fighting at the time? And the reason Jen is so freaked out is because the FBI is really good at connecting dots, and they are the dots. Jen gets really nasty and says, you know what, Steve was right. Everywhere you go, chaos follows. She asks, what's going to happen to me if I get caught? To my boys, they'll be orphans. But since Judy is working with the FBI, she vows that that won't happen, and she can talk to the FBI and fix this whole thing and steer them in another direction. But Jen says, I'm not going to let you take care of my boys. You were living in your car yesterday. You have some of the worst judgment of anybody I've ever seen. Jen tells her, do not steer the FBI in any direction, just stay out of it. But Judy can't stay out of it. She heads to Steve's office along with Ben and starts planning a story that Steve went off to Mexico because he said previously that if he was ever in trouble, that's where he would go. And it's a pretty believable story. And when Ben and Judy get to Steve's office, it's been completely raided by the FBI. Torn apart. And Ben can't figure out what kind of mess Steve was in. And Judy says, I know it has something to do with the art gallery because it was a front. Ben starts shaking his head and says, you know what? I'm glad you guys broke up because Steve doesn't deserve you. And that's when Judy admits that she's the one who turned him into the FBI for money laundering. She starts apologizing, but Ben says, don't apologize. You did the right thing. He brought this all on himself. Then while looking through his office, Judy finds the rock that Steve took from the petrified forest. And Ben says, I thought you weren't supposed to take rocks from there. And she says, yeah, there's multiple signs about that. But Steve's gonna Steve, and Judy decides to keep the rock. And while they were going through Steve's office, Jen headed to work and started looking at who was going to take care of her kids if she was caught. And there's really only one option for her. It's Lorna. So she asks Lorna if she will take care of the boys, and of course she says yes. But immediately Lorna thinks she's sick, and she says, I'm not sick. She says, well, how are you sleeping? Jen says, I mean, it could be better. So Lorna pulls out some pills and says, here, take 2. But the pills are fentanyl, and Lorna can't even remember where she got them. Jen grabs the pills and then heads over to the Holy Harmonies concert where she's approached by a mother repping the Harmommies. And she's asking Jen to sign up for an event to help out, and Jen keeps saying, oh, I'm busy this day, I'm busy that day. And when she keeps pressing for it, Jen really snaps at her. She then asks Christopher if his brother is still a lawyer because she needs to redo her will, but he's actually a criminal defense attorney, and she says, yeah, I'll take the number anyway. When her, Henry, and Charlie get home that day, Detective Perez is there at their doorstep, and Jen sends the kids in, and Detective Perez is there because she's giving her the restraining order against Judy Hale, but as she's doing so, Judy comes out of the house, and Detective Perez is like, you've got to be kidding me. Jen plays it off like she needed a restraining order because it was a misunderstanding, but Detective Perez is not buying it. She says, it's a misunderstanding like she didn't hit your husband. You were in my office 2 days ago saying that I should arrest her, and if I had the evidence, I would have. But the girls tell Detective Perez that it wasn't Judy at all. It was actually Steve because Steve was driving and it was his car. And Judy was just taking the fall. Judy then goes inside, and Detective Perez warns Jen that Steve was mixed up with some really bad people. And if Steve was mixed up with the bad people, then Judy might also be mixed up with them, and she should probably stay away from her. And that night, Detective Perez heads over to Nick's place, admitting that you were right, Judy and Steve were the ones behind Jen's husband's death, but I could use some help on this. But he's not willing to do that because he doesn't want to work with the racist police chief in Laguna. It probably doesn't help, too, that he's a little tipsy, but he does go inside and grabs a folder and says, here, I did some digging, this might help, and then closes the door on her. Now, after that visit from Detective Perez and what she told Jen, Jen is a little freaked out. She wants to know exactly who these bad people are that Steve was in business with, and Judy says, it was the Greek mafia. But this actually could work to their benefit because the FBI is only worried about his business, and they'll probably figure that the Greek mafia took Steve out. And Judy's whole contention is that nobody knows where Steve is, so as long as everybody thinks that he is safe and running, then they're safe. But none of this is doing anything to qualm Jen's nerves. The group heads in to have dinner that night, but there's a knock at the door, and it's Ben returning a painting that Judy made for his parents. Judy then invites Ben in to have some dessert, and as he's eating it and Judy is getting him tea, Ben says, you know, Judy was probably right. He is down in Mexico. And this is the first time that Jen is hearing about this story. Ben then says, you know, Steve, everywhere he goes, chaos follows. But then they hear a scream from their garage because Henry went looking for the dad bird that hasn't shown up in a few days, and he's found him and he's in trouble. The bird is flying around the garage and he wants to help him out, so Judy grabs the bird and takes him outside, but the bird doesn't fly away, it actually stays. And that night after everyone's left, Jen hears a little tapping going on in the garage, and she goes to investigate and sees the bird is tapping on the window from outside. And the reason the bird's tapping on the window from outside is because dad bird is actually bird mom, and she has a nest full of baby birds in the garage. So Jen takes the nest outside so the mom can be reunited with her kids, but then she sees the pool and gets a flashback of what happened the previous night. And more specifically, what they actually did with the body, because Steve's body is sitting in the freezer in the garage. So Jen has a freezer with a Steve-sicle in it, and that night as she heads downstairs to grab Charlie some more water, she hears a noise from the garage and heads in to find Judy sitting there listening to whale sounds, trying to sleep next to the freezer. Judy just doesn't think it's right that Steve is in there all alone, but Jen says, you can't be sitting out here like this. What happens if the boys come out? What are you going to tell them? But Judy is buying into all these signs that she's seeing that are telling her that Steve shouldn't be in that freezer at all. And one of those signs is that the lights keep flickering on. And as the women are leaving, it happens, so Jen decides just to change the bulbs. She's not buying that it's some paranormal sign. But as they leave again, the light flickers again. And now they're both a little freaked out. They want to know what exactly is tripping the sensor. So they grab a broom and start banging on the freezer, and then all of a sudden, tons of rats scurry from under it. They call an exterminator, and he goes through the whole protocol of what he'll do to get rid of the rats. And then they ask, why were there so many of them? He says, well, they have trouble controlling their body temperature, so when they find a cool place, they hang out there. And if there's meat in that freezer, they can smell blood from like a mile away. Judy then asks if they can get into the freezer, says, oh yeah, they can chew into that freezer. And to Judy, this is a sign that they have to move Steve out of that freezer, but Jen doesn't want to do that. She wants to keep Steve in there for the next 7 years until the kids go off to college, so that if she does get caught, they'll be okay. But 7 years is a long time. And they need to figure out how to get rid of a body without going on Google and doing some research that the FBI can track. Jen suggests wheeling him out in a suitcase, but Judy doesn't want to put the man that she was going to marry in a suitcase. Judy suggests renting a boat and dumping him out in the ocean, but Jen doesn't like that idea at all and says, let's think back to the suitcase. And Judy goes, no, we can't do that. He was a person with a soul. And Jen reminds her that he might have been a person, but he was a terrible person. He left Ted to die. He left Judy after all the miscarriages. He was kind of a piece of shit. Why are you defending him? And Judy's defending him because she feels like it's her fault that Steve is dead. Because she brought Steve into Jen's life, and she never expected Steve to lash out and actually attack Jen. Although that never actually happened. Jen tries to make her feel better by telling her it's not your fault. Judy heads off to work and overhears Flo telling Melissa that she wants to leave and she hates it there at the nursing home. So Judy pops in trying to help the situation, telling her that she hosts an art class every Tuesday and Thursday, and maybe she would like that. But when Flo starts criticizing the art in her room, Judy takes the art out saying, yeah, no, this art sucks. You have a good eye. And as she's leaving, Melissa comes out and thanks her for trying to settle down the situation. Judy tells her that a lot of people hate it there at first, but then they end up growing and actually love it. She asks Melissa if there's anything she can get her to help with the situation, and after a few suggestions, she settles on weed. The two go out to smoke in Abe's car, and she tells Judy that she's moving her mom in there after a year of living with her. And it just didn't go right at all. And after her mom broke her hip, she just felt like she couldn't take care of her anymore, so she moved her in here, and she feels guilty about it. Ever since Michelle's dad died, Flo has just been miserable. It's as if she feels guilty about being happy. And Judy says, I get that, but Michelle says, I don't. Life goes on. We all die. The world keeps going and other people need you. And this is a breakthrough for Judy, who is now realizing that just because Steve is gone doesn't mean she has to be miserable. Jen, meanwhile, has had a really bad day at work. A couple they were selling a house to has tried to pull out of escrow, and she's getting shit from Lorna about it. She's also dealing with this Edgar Allan Poe Telltale Heart situation where she's hearing the humming of the freezer from the garage everywhere she goes as she's trying to get work done. So she types in how to get rid of, and then it auto puts in a dead body, and she frantically starts to delete it, but then Shandy, the little girl who found Ted's body, shows up out of nowhere saying, why are you trying to get rid of a dead body? Jen goes on to explain that she's not, it was just automatically put in there. And Shandy, being a little psychopath, says that she would take it to this local forest because that's where all the gangs drop their dead bodies, and apparently there's more dead bodies there than trees. Jen, being horrified, says, how do you even know that? She says, oh, the dark web. It's an absolutely great research tool. And then Jen wants to know why Shandy's even there, and she's having a play date with Henry. Later that day, she goes into the garage and opens up the freezer, and this is the first time she's looking at Steve's body in there. But as she's doing so, Henry and Shandy come in, and Jen frantically closes the freezer door and says, you guys got to get out of here. But the more they ask questions about what she's doing and this and that, it's stressing Jen out more and more and more until finally she freaks out and says, you guys got to get the fuck out of here. And it really scares Shandy and Henry. And immediately, Jen knows she messed up, and she starts apologizing and asking what they needed, but they just slowly back out of the garage. And when they do so, Jen has a breakdown about what she just did, yelling at her kid about something that really wasn't his fault. She's just so stressed out. She then goes to a department store and grabs a bunch of chemicals that will, quote, dissolve anything. She heads home and fills up her bathtub with it, but instead of dropping Steve's body into it, she drops a dead rat into it. And as she's seeing the rat dissolve, she's just overcome and leaves the bathroom. But when she does so, she runs into Judy, who wants to know what she's doing. And when Judy finds out, she freaks out and says, I need to see Steve right now, because she thinks that it's Steve's body in that bathtub, when in reality it's a rat. And even though Jen is trying to talk her down, she's still demanding to see Steve's body, but Jen says, you definitely do not want to see Steve right now. Judy tells her, look, I'll do anything you want, but I'm not doing that. And after seeing what happened to the rat, Jen doesn't want to do it either, but she doesn't really know what to do. She's not good at this whole pretending to be okay thing like Judy was. And Judy says, I wasn't okay with that. Just because I was living here, I was miserable. It got to the point where I had to tell you what happened. And guilt starts to get to Jen, and right as she's about to tell Judy exactly what happened that night, the entire town is hit with a rolling blackout. And you can't exactly have a decomposing body in a freezer that isn't on. So Jen says, you know what, I have an idea. And the two get in the car and head to that forest that Shandy mentioned. And as they're doing so, Judy says, wait, didn't you have something to tell me before the power went out? But instead of actually telling her the truth, Jen just says, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgive you. And they head on into the forest. In episode 4, Judy and Jen are driving back from burying Steve's body. And I said it was a local forest, and I meant local in terms of like it's in the same state. It's quite a drive. And as they're traveling back, Jen starts panicking because she thinks she left the phone in the forest, but it's just in her pocket. But because she's holding the phone while driving, they get pulled over by the police. And the police officer has a very weird demeanor because he starts off the conversation with, was it worth it? You committed a crime. Which puts the fear of God into the women, but he says, when you picked up that phone while driving, you committed a crime. So they're very grateful just to get out of this with a ticket. But Jen definitely is worried that now there's a record of their whereabouts. They stop off at a diner where Jen is kind of apologizing, but more so explaining why they couldn't just sit there and have a ceremony for Steve, and they had to get into that forest, bury him, and get out as quickly as possible, even though Judy really wanted to do something for him. They then stop off at a hotel to get some sleep, and as they're heading to the room, they run into Karen's husband. Now, Karen's husband is always out of town and is shocked to see Jen and claims that he's there for business, but then his gay lover shows up, and it becomes very obvious to everybody involved what is actually going on. He tries to explain himself while Jen is saying, don't worry, I'm not going to tell anybody, and she and Judy head up to the room. When she gets up to the room, she calls Charlie to check in. She told the kids that they were going out of town to visit with Judy's sick aunt, and she's left Christopher in charge, and it's Christopher, Shandy, and Henry, and it is driving Charlie absolutely insane. He also feels like this is a good opportunity to ask once again for a car, but that's not exactly high on Jen's priority list at the moment. Once Jen gets off the phone, she notices that Judy is kind of visibly shaken. She tries to explain to Judy while the other night was difficult, she feels like they're finally over the hurdle of that. But Judy isn't saying a word. She's literally just zoned out, staring off into space. Jen asks, are you mad at me? Because it'd be completely normal if you were, but Judy isn't mad at her. And it's freaking Jen out because usually Jen is the negative one while Judy is the positive one, and she doesn't really know how to act in this situation. Judy just doesn't feel like talking at the moment and wants to go to sleep. And at night, Jen wakes her up and suggests that they go down to the hotel bar and have a toast for Steve, and Judy really likes that idea. So they get all dressed up and head down to the bar and find out if you're there for the wedding that's in town that weekend, then it's an open bar. So of course they say, yeah, no, we're here for the wedding. The bride's my cousin. They order drinks and try to do a makeshift eulogy, but it's kind of awkward because this isn't exactly how Judy planned this thing out. Judy ends up crying, saying he's the first person that ever made me feel loved. She also tells her that the morning after they hit Ted, she woke up and started looking for Steve and finally found him at the beach, and he was bawling his eyes out. It's not like he didn't care about what he did. He was gutted by it. He just decided to hold in those emotions for a lot of people. And that's why she wanted to take him to the beach, because he was comfortable there. She didn't want to just dump him off into a forest. Judy is really breaking down as she regrets never getting to say goodbye to Steve. And at this point, the guilt is also getting to Jen, who is also crying, and she says, you deserve to say goodbye to Steve. And in all honesty, this is why Steve loved you, because you're the kindest person in the whole world, and I love you so much. And as the two women are crying their eyes out, some dude from the wedding shows up and asks if they want to dance, to which Jen goes, dude, read the room. Does it look like we want to dance right now? And after he slowly leaves, they laugh it off, but then they decide, no, actually, no, we do want to dance. They end up salvaging the night and getting really drunk and having a lot of fun. And at one point, even give a toast to Karen, who has no idea that her husband is cheating on her with another man. But when they try to order more drinks, the bartender says, yeah, you guys owe me $83. I know you're not with the wedding party. Because the guy that asked them to dance who they freaked out on, yeah, he told on them. And snitches get stitches where Jen Harding comes from. The next morning, Jen is awoken to a phone call from Christopher who lets him know that Dad Bird has been killed. And when she gets home, Henry is just distraught and they're trying to figure out what happened. And the only logical conclusion is that Christopher's dog Adele killed the bird. Shandy even speaks up and says it was probably just animal instinct. But none of this is helping Henry at the moment. And just like Judy, Henry just wanted to say goodbye. So they have a little makeshift funeral in the backyard for Mom Bird, Dad Bird, whatever you want to call it, the bird. But that night, Jen gets a knock at the door and it's Shandy and her mom. And Shandy comes clean that it was actually her and not Adele who killed the bird. And in more proof that she's a little psychopath, it was definitely intentional. But as she's leaving, Shandy says, I really don't want to tell Henry because he's my best friend. And Jen tells her, sometimes people need a friend more than they need the truth. You don't have to tell Henry. Judy that night packages the rock that was taken from the Forbidden Forest and sends it back with a note that's apologizing for taking it. Henry goes outside and says goodnight to the bird, but as he's doing so finds that wooden bird that was used to kill Steve. And Charlie, who's in desperate need of transportation and was told by Jen that he's going to get his father's bike once she musters the energy to get over to the storage unit and get it, has made his way over to that storage unit. But when he opens it up, there's not a bike there, there's Steve's car. In episode 5, the exterminator shows up and takes out all of the traps and compliments Jen on her freezer, and Jen says, you know what, take it, you can have it. Because both Jen and Judy feel way better having that freezer just out of the house. They then go food shopping, where Judy makes mention that ever since sending that rock back, she feels like there's a lot of positive energy. And maybe Jen should have sent a rock back too, because when they get to the checkout line, all of her cards have been declined. And she makes a scene, but it doesn't change the fact that she's broke. And when she gets home, she looks at the bills and realizes just how broke she actually is. I mean, she's drowning in debt. And because of the financial burden, the stress is just getting to Jen, and she asks Judy very nicely to give her some space at this time. So Judy heads to the art gallery, but she finds out that it's been cleared out and they're going to put an Arby's in there. She then meets up with Ben for lunch and asks, hey, do you know where my paintings are? Because I really want to sell them, but he has no idea. He does tell her, however, that she is right. Steve is probably in Mexico, because the FBI has record of him crossing the border at one point, and they're actually after a really bigger fish. So if they find Steve, they can probably cut a plea deal with the FBI. And while Ben thinks that's great, Judy, on the other hand, who actually knows what happened to Steve, is stressed out about learning this information. Ben starts pressuring Judy about, if you know where he is, just tell me, and the pressure gets to Judy, who cracks and says, all I know is he was really stressed, he bought a condo and backed out at the last second and actually really screwed Jen over. And Ben says, wait, you're Jen? As in Jen saw him a few days ago? But Judy tries to walk back the comments. She then heads to the bathroom and just starts beating herself up over letting this info slip. And as she's doing so, Michelle walks in because Judy didn't lock the door. And Judy says, yeah, I'm just having a day. And Michelle is also having a day, so they decide to go out drinking afterwards. Jen, meanwhile, is trying to figure out how to scale back and save her finances and asks Lorna, hey, how much do you think I can get for my house? But she finds out that Lorna's name is actually on the house. And Lorna is unwilling to let Jen sell it because that's the only house that the boys have known, and they have a lot of memories of their dad in that house. Lorna goes on to say that you don't have a financial problem, you have a personality problem. Because your personality is off-putting and it hurts your sales. She brings up an example of a couple who was going to back out of a house because of a mold issue until Lorna had to step in and, quote, show them a little love, to which Jen wasn't willing to do. And the criticism by Jen from her ex-mother-in-law annoys her, but she still has to figure out how exactly she's going to scale back. So she calls up ADT to figure out if they can lower the rate, but they can't because she signed a contract. And she's interrupted by Ben, who just stops in and says, hey, I just had lunch with Judy, and she mentioned that you were going to sell Steve a condo, but he backed out and screwed you over. Jen downplays it by saying, look, deals fall through all the time, there's no hard feelings, but I definitely wasn't the last person to see him. I mean, he has all these associates. Also, do you do short-term leases? Because right now I'm living with my mother and she's driving me nuts. So Jen goes to bend over and grab the folder of short-term leases, but her back is really jacked up. And since Ben is a chiropractor, he asks if she needs some help with it, but she says, no, I'm fine, it's nothing. But she ends up throwing her back out and needs help getting home, and Ben drives her home and sets her up, all the while saying, if you need an adjustment, I'll give you one, but she's saying, no, I'm fine. Then there's a knock at the door, and it's Karen with more of that orange wine. Immediately, she thinks she knows Ben and recognizes him, but Ben's never met her. She then asks Jen if she wants to have some orange wine with her because her husband is once again out of town, but Jen says, this isn't a really good time. I threw my back out, and that's my chiropractor. But after Jen told Karen that her and Steve fighting was actually really raucous sex, Karen isn't buying the fact that he's her chiropractor. She thinks the two are having sex. And that's when she says, wait, I do know you. I saw you on my security camera footage. You were here the other night. And Jen stares Karen down and says, no, you didn't. Shut up. You're drunk. You don't know what you're talking about. It gets pretty awkward where Ben just goes, I'm going to go out and get some ice for your back. And Karen starts apologizing, saying how she's just so lonely that her husband's constantly out of town. And she apologizes for misinterpreting the situation. But that interaction definitely piqued Ben's curiosity. And when he gets back, Karen is gone, but he gives Jen the ice and says, what was that all about? She thought that she knew me? And she says, no, it was somebody else. And he awkwardly kind of tries to flirt with her, but it just doesn't go that great. But Jen's back is really messed up, and she finally accepts the offer of an adjustment. But as Ben is giving her the adjustment, she's getting freaked out looking at the face of a man that she killed the previous night because Ben and Steve are twins. And while the adjustment helps, she starts crying her eyes out because of it. She apologized to Ben later, and he reveals to her that he had 7 heart surgeries, and she reveals to him that the back pain probably came from her career of dancing, to which, surprisingly, he was also a dancer for a while. And he starts dancing, but not good. He then notices, though, Jen's sign to get a stop sign at that intersection that Charlie almost got hit at, And she says, yeah, I've become one of those mothers that I absolutely can't stand. And he says, what, a mother who cares? He goes on to explain that his own mother won't even leave the house because she's so worried that if she does, that Steve will pop up and she won't be there. He also explains that he hasn't talked to Steve in over a year because of his drinking issue. And by he, I mean Ben's drinking issue. He thought eventually they would make amends, and he's regretting the fact that he might never be able to. But then she gets a phone call from Charlie, who found Steve's car and has been gallivanting all through Laguna with his girlfriend Parker. Charlie thought that his mother was hiding it for his birthday present when, in fact, she wasn't. And after almost getting caught by the cops making out with Parker in a parking lot, he has now run out of gas and needs a pickup. So Jen calls Judy, who went out to eat with Melissa at the restaurant that Melissa cooks at. And it's worth mentioning that Judy is not picking up on the flirtatious vibes that Michelle is giving off. But when she gets the phone call, Judy immediately leaves to meet Jen at the location of the car. As soon as Jen gets there, she lights into Charlie, saying that that's not your car, you shouldn't have taken it, it's not your birthday present, Judy will take you and Parker home. But instead of filling up the car with gas, she douses the gasoline all over the car and lights it on fire. In episode 6, both Jen and Judy are interrogating Charlie about where he was with that car, and they find out that he was just fooling around with his girlfriend in the car, although they don't know if they were just making out, having sex, whatever. So Jen punishes him by grabbing his cell phone, grabbing his video games, taking the door off of his room, and now she's going to drag him everywhere she goes. And while Jen goes through Charlie's phone, she sees that Parker tagged Charlie in a bunch of Instagram posts. And that's a problem because you see the car and you see a TKG hat in the photo. So Charlie, Jen, and Judy head over to Parker's house, and Jen tries to nicely talk to Parker about taking the post down. The problem is, Parker is a micro-influencer on Instagram, and she just can't take that photo down. She needs a reason to. i.e., she needs money. So Jen pays her off with money she doesn't really have, and Parker agrees to take the photo down. And when Jen gets back in the car, Judy gets a phone call from the Laguna police. Detective Perez has called Judy in because she's obtained Steve's phone records, and he called Judy 8 times the night he disappeared and wants to know what he was calling about. But Judy says, I just sent him straight to voicemail. And Detective Perez pressures her to listen to those voicemails, but they're not pretty. It involves Steve calling Judy a bitch, Steve yelling at Judy. There's even a death threat in there. It's very hostile messages. To the point where Detective Perez says, are you scared for your life? And Judy says, no, I'm fine. But it's definitely upsetting to hear for her. Jen, meanwhile, has dragged Charlie to one of her listings to show Ben. And while it really doesn't fit Ben's scene, he agrees to take it because he just wants to get out of his mother's house so badly. He says how it's nothing but Steve, 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 and they're even thinking about offering up a reward. And when he says that, it piques Charlie's interest, who says, what reward? But Jen just starts yelling at Charlie to just shut up and mind his own business. Ben then gets interrupted by a phone call, and Jen heads downstairs outside to find Charlie smoking and just acting out. She tells him that you're a child, and you should just enjoy being a child, because when you get over here, when you get to the adult side, it's not that much fun. Jen then gets a phone call from Judy, who says the good news is they haven't found the car, but she has to hang up on Judy because Ben has shown up back in the room after his phone call, and he's visibly shaken. Because the police have found remains, and he needs to go down to the Laguna Police Department to figure out if it's his brothers or not. So Jen goes down with Ben to the Laguna Police Department, but they find out that the remains are not of Steve's, they're actually female. And Detective Perez immediately wants to know, how do you two know each other? And they explain that Jen is trying to find Ben a house. When they get back in the car, Ben is kind of overcome with grief because he's accepted the fact that that was going to be Steve, and it wasn't. He also thanks Jen for being a very kind realtor and offers to buy her a drink that night, but she says, no, I can't. I've got to go see this Christian children's choir where my son is having his first solo. And in a not-so-surprising twist, Ben is very familiar with the Holy Harmonies because from 86 to 89, he was one of them. And he kind of self-invites himself to the show. Now, Judy is also planning to go to that show, but before so, she gets tacos with Michelle, and Michelle is once again putting out heavy feelers. But while getting tacos, they run into Nick, who is not doing well post-breakup with Judy. When Judy asks him how he's doing, he says, well, I got out of the house today, so I guess that's a good thing. And this is the first time that Michelle is finding out that Judy is actually straight. She tells Michelle about the love triangle between her, Steve, and Nick, and how she broke up with Nick because she thought she was pregnant with Steve's child, but in fact she wasn't. And Michelle says, yeah, I wanted to have kids, but my ex didn't want to either. And in fact, I'm actually still living with her. I know it's awkward, but I can't just leave her because at this point we're kind of like family. So now it's all out in the open that Melissa's a lesbian and Judy is straight-ish. But she then invites Melissa to go to the Holy Harmonies concert, and they agree. But while they're watching the show, Christopher comes and takes Jen to the side and says Henry's having a problem because Henry doesn't want to go on for his solo. Christopher thinks it's because his dog killed his pet bird, but Jen tells him Adele didn't do that, it was Shandy. And that's a big relief to Christopher. And it's also a relief to Christopher that Henry doesn't want to do the solo because his falsetto just isn't up to par yet. So while Henry thinks that he's going to disappoint his mom if he doesn't do it, Jen says, all right, well, Henry, what do you want to do? And Henry wants to go to the arcade. So that's where everybody heads and they all blow off some steam and have a lot of fun. While they're at the arcade, Jen notices how Ben is interacting with her kids, and they're very comfortable with him. She then goes to Charlie and says, I'm going to put your door back on your room, but just don't have sex. It's the very awkward single mother-son sex conversation that I know all too well. Shout out to my mom. Later on, Jen catches Ben staring at her and she says, "What?" And he says, "Oh, I just remembered. I got to give you the check for the down payment." She says, "I can't let you have that place. I'm not going to make you pay that much money for a beachfront property when you don't even like the beach. You should like the view that you're looking at." And he does, because he's looking at Jen. But those are the only sparks that are flying, because Michelle and Judy have made it into a photo booth, and after taking some normal photos, the two just start making out like crazy. This leads back to Michelle's place, which leads to Michelle's bedroom, where they close the door, and shortly after that, Detective Perez, who it turns out is Michelle's ex, returns home. But unfortunately for Judy and Jen, Judy's handiwork the previous night by lighting Steve's car on fire has been found, of all people, by Nick, who has gone back to the police force. And he's staring at the charred remains of Steve's car. Just before Judy makes the walk of shame, she decides to make coffee in Melissa's house, but she's caught by Detective Perez. And Detective Perez is absolutely floored that she's looking at Judy Hale in her kitchen. And she's even more floored when she finds out why Judy Hale is there and tells her, "Get out of my house." So Judy heads home, where Jen has spent the morning clocking speeding cars with Charlie at that intersection she wants to get a stop sign at. And in a way, Charlie kind of gives his blessing for Jen to date Ben. So when Judy gets home, she immediately starts bragging about how great her night was, but it's interrupted by a knock at the door, and it's Ben to see more rental properties. And Judy tells Jen, "That's why you look so good today." But Jen says, "I'm not dressed up for him." But when she opens the door, Ben is visibly frazzled by something. And it's because they found Steve's car. Thanks to the VIN number, they were able to identify it as Steve's car. And the women are obviously freaked out. But because of it, Ben is really in no mood to start looking at rental properties, and he has to cancel on Jen. On top of all of that, he's supposed to plan this prayer vigil for Steve, although he has no idea what to do. And after it becomes painfully obvious of that, Jen steps in and says, "Just let me and Judy do it." Maybe it was guilt, maybe because she felt bad, maybe because she likes him, but Jen has now agreed to plan the prayer vigil for the guy that she killed. And of all people, Judy doesn't think this is a good idea, but Jen says, "I know how it looks, but in all reality, this might be the best thing for us, because no one's going to suspect that the two people that plan the prayer vigil are actually the reason why they're having a prayer vigil." And Judy feels like this is the best time to tell Jen that Michelle's ex-girlfriend/roommate is Detective Perez. And as soon as Jen hears that, she says, "You have to end the relationship. I mean, Detective Perez hates you." But Judy doesn't want to end the relationship with Michelle because Michelle is the first person since Steve that makes her feel worthy. But Jen persists with the fact that you still cannot see Michelle if her ex is Detective Perez. So Judy heads off to work, and Michelle shows up and apologizes for whatever Detective Perez said to her in the morning. It was uncalled for. Detective Perez told Michelle that she shouldn't be dating Judy in the first place because Judy is a riptide that it's just going to take her down. But luckily for Judy, Detective Perez does not choose who Michelle hangs out with. And out of nowhere, Judy breaks things off with Michelle in a very "it's not you, it's me" sort of situation. And you could tell by her face that it really bothers Judy that she has to do this. So the next day, the two women are getting ready for the vigil. That's going to be that night, and Judy is visibly depressed. And Charlie heads down and asks what they're doing, and they explain that they're doing a vigil for Steve's brother. "Oh, great. Did they find him?" And she says, "No, they haven't." He says, "Oh, that sucks. At least with Dad, we knew right away." And when Charlie leaves, Judy tells Jen, "I can't do this. I can't pray for a safe return knowing what actually happened to him." But Judy's real concern is Steve's mom, because Steve's mom's never liked her. But Jen is saying, "It's going to be really weird if you're not there, and don't worry about Steve's mom. I'll protect you from her." She still thinks that it's very big if they show up, because if they show up, then no one's going to suspect them. So they head to the vigil where the Holy Harmonies are performing, and Pastor Wayne is kind of running point on the microphone. And Judy and Jen are handing out fake candles to everybody who's showing up. And everything's going great until Steve's mom shows up. Right away, Steve's mom is pretty rude to Judy. She thanks her for planning all this, but says, "You look about the same." And when Judy says, "You look well," she just cuts her off and says, "I'm not." And Judy is really nervous and uncomfortable, and Jen is true to her word and saves her and says, "Can you do that thing that I couldn't do?" and saves her from the situation. Jen goes over there and introduces herself to Steve's mom, and she thanks Jen for planning it, saying, "It was too difficult for me to do. Do you have any kids?" And Jen says, "Yes, I have 2 boys." And Steve's mom says, "Oh, just like me. Well, I pray to God that you never have to go through this." And when Jen saved Judy, she just headed off to the bar, where she's greeted by Howard, who's the chief of police, and he's a little surprised to see Judy there, and she says, "Oh, I'm just trying to support the family." And he says, "Were you trying to support the family when you ratted Steve out to the FBI?" And he just leaves. That night, as the prayer vigil rages on, Judy's talking to Ben, but all of a sudden, Steve's former assistant walks by and says hi to Judy, but walks over to that girl who interrupted Steve and Judy's meeting that one day, and he was clearly dating her. And Steve's assistant is consoling her, and then all of a sudden Ben goes over and consoles her, and Judy sees that the girl was pregnant, and she gets really pissed off. So she goes over to find more information about it, and she finds out that the girl is 4 months pregnant, and it is Steve's child. But then the girl starts crying, and Judy feels really guilty about the fact that this child's going to grow up without a father. So when she starts crying, Judy just consoles her by saying, you gotta keep Faith alive, I'm sure he'll show up. Jen, meanwhile, is still handing out candles to the people that are showing up, and one of those people is Detective Perez. And Jen says, what are you doing here? She says, I'm working. You wouldn't believe how many times the perpetrator shows up to things like this. It's like moth to a flame. So Jen kind of drops everything she's doing to try to go find Judy, but it's clear that Judy is bothered about something, and she asks, are you okay? And Judy lets her know that the girl that Steve was seeing is pregnant. So she begs Jen to go, and Jen says, okay, yeah, no, we can go now. But at that same time, Ben hops on a microphone and thanks both of them to the entire audience for planning this whole thing out. He also says that they set up an anonymous tip line with a hefty reward. And the two women, thinking they were kind of off scot-free, are like, oh, this is great. Okay, hefty reward. Awesome. And after Ben's done talking, they start up a slideshow about a bunch of pictures with Steve and Ben and his mom. And it's really upsetting to Jen to look at the pictures along with how Steve's mom is reacting. And also at the same time, Charlie, who's shown up to support Ben. And in her mind, she's going through what it would be like for her if she lost one of her boys. And it's very troubling to her. And as she's getting pretty emotional, Pastor Wayne shows up telling her that she's got to have faith and that God will find the truth. But that's not exactly going to make Jen feel better since she's the one who killed him. And she walks away. And eventually Ben finds her and offers her a drink, to which she says, I thought you didn't drink. And he says, I don't, but I had to do shots for Steve, right? She apologizes, but Ben says, what are you apologizing for? You're like the only good thing about this. If there's a silver lining in this situation, it's meeting you. Ben then leads in the two start kissing, and Judy sees that. And having been told the day before that she has to break off a relationship with Michelle, this kind of pisses off Judy. But as she turns around, she runs into Detective Perez, who says, funny seeing you here. Judy tells her that she broke things off with Michelle because she respects people's space. But Detective Perez finds that funny because she's had two big cases in the last year, and they both are linked by Judy Hale. She warns Judy to watch herself, and a drunk Judy snaps back, fine, watch me. But all you're going to see is that I'm a good person who means well. But both Judy and Jen have a minor issue because Charlie, who is there watching the video slideshow, sees a photo of Steve pop up that has the car that he was driving and the TKG hat that Parker was wearing, and Charlie knows it's definitely not a coincidence. Episode 8, Jen comes home to find a drunk Judy, and right before Judy confronts Jen about making out with Ben, they're both confronted by Charlie, who wants to know why they had Steve's car. And on the fly, they make up a lie about how Steve gave them the car after he screwed over Jen on that bad real estate deal. He then asks how it got burned, and she says, well, it wouldn't start, and I left it there, and you know people, they just light cars on fire. But no, he doesn't know that, because that's not really a thing. So Charlie says, well, let's do the right thing. Let's go to the cops about this. But she says, well, I can't, because if I go to the cops, I'm going to have to tell them how you were driving without a license, and you'll never get your license. And now Charlie feels a sense of guilt and starts apologizing, but they say, don't worry about it. And as soon as they get rid of Charlie, drunk Judy asks, why is it okay for you to make out with Ben, but I can't be with Michelle? That's pretty hypocritical. And Jen reassures her that it was a mistake, and when Ben comes over tomorrow, she's going to tell him that it was a mistake and that she can't work with him anymore. I'm just kind of over this. And Judy's not. Judy says, what, we're never supposed to be happy because of what we did? And at that moment, Jen kind of sees the hypocrisy of the situation and says, look, if you want to be with Michelle, go be with Michelle. Just don't get leaky with the information with her. You still can't tell anybody what happened. So with the okay from Jen, Judy heads over to Michelle's house. No word if she was drinking and driving, but they end up making up and spending the night together. The next day, Ben shows up with flowers at Jen's doorstep, but the flowers are actually from Ben's mother because she really appreciated the fact that Jen planned that entire vigil for Steve. Jen says, thank you, but I really feel like we should talk about last night. But Ben has no recollection of last night because he was so blackout drunk. And he really regrets it because he was a year sober the previous week. So Ben asks, did I do anything stupid? And Jen decides it's best to just not say anything and say, no, you didn't. Never mind. But Ben is no longer thinking of renting a property. He's thinking of buying one. And coincidentally, his mother is looking to scale down. And it's because of Steve, but it's a long story. But they want Jen to sell the house because they want somebody that Ben's mom feels comfortable with. And she feels comfortable with Jen. And initially, Jen doesn't want to do it until she finds out it's a $10 to $15 million house. And Ben says, if anybody deserves that commission, it would be you. And it's hard to say no to that commission, so Jen agrees to look at it. So Jen heads over to the Woods estate, and it is a mansion. And once again, their mom thanks Jen for all she did, saying it meant everything. And when Steve comes home, I'll make sure that he thanks you himself. She then lets Ben give Jen a tour of the house. And while doing so, Jen notices a picture of Ben and Steve when they were kids at the beach, but Ben is wearing a turtleneck. And he says, yeah, it's because I had all those scars from the surgeries, and I was just really self-conscious being around girls that they wouldn't get it. But Jen, who also has scars from her mastectomy, says, I think scars are a good thing because it shows that you went through something traumatic and you came out on the other side. Afterwards, Jen goes and picks up Charlie and lets him know that business is going so well that she thinks she can get him a car. But when they get home, somebody has spray painted I know what you did on their garage door. Jen tells Charlie to get inside and then heads over to Karen's place to look at the security camera footage. But Karen doesn't answer. It's her husband. And her husband lets her know that Karen and him are splitting up, but she doesn't want to hear any of that. She just wants to see the security camera footage and to see who did it. And after she sees who did it, she asks, hey, can you delete this along with like the last month off the cloud? And he agrees, and she goes back home, where she approaches Charlie asking, what did you do to Parker where she would spray paint that on our garage door? And Charlie goes on to explain that it's not a big deal, he just met somebody else. But she says it is a big deal. I mean, when you love somebody and they just leave you like that, it's hurtful. And she then orders Charlie to go clean it up with paint from the garage. Judy, meanwhile, headed off to work where she went to Flo's room, but Flo isn't there and something clearly happened. And she finds out that she's in the intensive care unit. So Judy sneaks in and sees Michelle leaving her mom's room, and Michelle is happy to see her and a bit surprised, and that's the exact opposite reaction from Detective Perez, who is also there. She once again, in front of Judy, mind you, reiterates to Michelle that she shouldn't be seeing her because she's a riptide. But since both of them don't get the reference, she says, let me make it easy for you. The best case scenario is she's an unstable accused stalker who Detective Perez has personally arrested for destruction of property. Now, the worst case scenario is she's involved in an active investigation where her ex-fiancé has gone missing and is probably dead. And Detective Perez just doesn't want Michelle to end up another victim. But this is a lot to take in for Michelle, who is dealing with her mother being in intensive care, and she just walks away saying, I can't deal with this right now. And Judy and Detective Perez go their separate ways in the hospital. And while walking around the hospital, Judy sees the NICU with all the newborn babies, and a woman's walking out who was a cuddler, and basically her job is just to cuddle the newborns. And Judy loves that idea of a job, and the woman says, yeah, I get out of it more than the babies do. The woman even suggests that Judy become one, and she says, you can do that? She says, yeah, you just have to interview, and they have to do a background check to weed out the criminals. But Judy probably wouldn't pass a background check. When she returns, Detective Perez is sitting down crying, and Judy asks if there's any news on Flo. And Detective Perez reluctantly lets her know that she's on life support and it's not looking good. And Detective Perez is really broken up about this and crying a lot because Detective Perez lost her mother at an early age, and Flo has really been that mother that she hasn't had. Judy, looking to make Detective Perez feel better, tells her how she lost her mother a while ago too. She then offers to give Detective Perez a hug, but Detective Perez doesn't want that. So Judy does the next best thing and grabs her a box of tissues. But Judy's mom is not dead, and that night she tries to get a hold of her, but she's unsuccessful. And while Judy is trying to get in touch with her mom, Jen gets a visit from Ben, who says, I'm sick of lying. I'm sick of acting like I don't remember what happened last night, and I only did it because I was drunk. I did it because I wanted to for a while, and the two end up hooking up and spending the night together. Now, Charlie did end up cleaning up the spray paint from the garage, but when he comes back into the garage, he notices the gas can. And then he goes into his book bag where he took a toiletry bag from Steve's car that had a phone and a flash drive on it, and he opens the phone and calls the last number in it, and it ends up being the Laguna chief of police on the other end. And the chief, of course, thinks it's Steve calling, but Charlie just hangs up. Now, the chief of police has put Nick on the tip line, and Nick's having an issue because it's kind of hard to handle a tip line when the missing suspect's twin is walking around town. But the chief is very adamant that they need to find whoever did this to Steve because Steve is a good guy. And Nick says he's so good that he was being investigated by the FBI. But the chief has it convinced in his head that that was just Judy Hale trying to get revenge. But Nick doesn't buy that an art teacher was trying to get revenge on her ex-fiancé. He thinks it has more to do with the fact that Steve was wrapped up with the Greek mafia. And the chief just acts like Nick is going crazy again. But that night, Nick gets a phone call from the tip line, and it's Parker, who has some very interesting information that she thinks that Nick should see. In episode 9, Jen awakes next to Steve in her bed and immediately regrets what she did. She shimmies onto the bathroom, and when she comes out of the shower, she tries to end things with Ben. But he doesn't understand. And Jen is simply freaked out with the fact that she just slept with a guy that looks identical to the person she killed. And even though Ben makes a really good plea, Jen tells him you gotta get out. And as soon as he leaves, Jen starts crying. When Ben makes the walk of shame, he runs into Charlie and immediately makes an excuse about how he needed to meet his mom there for an early meeting. But as he's leaving, it's pretty obvious that he's sad and upset, and he tells Charlie, hey, take care of your mom, and then he walks out. That same morning, Judy heads to prison because she's visiting her mom, who's an inmate. And this is the first time in 15 years that she's even seeing her mother. But it was a simple miscommunication because while Judy was sending her mom letters, her mom was sending letters back, but Judy wasn't getting them. And because Judy wasn't responding, her mom didn't feel it necessary to call her because she didn't think that Judy wanted to be in her life anymore. And because of what happened with Flo, Judy is heading there to make amends with her mom. And her mom, even though she's in prison, is the happiest she's been in a while because she's clean and sober and comfortable. So the two catch up, and Judy asks her mom how she ended up in prison, but her mom says, I can't really talk about it. But it's the system. Because once you come in here, you just keep coming back and back and back. Judy then apologizes for ratting her mom out on the stand when she was a kid, but her mom says, don't worry about it. It was a long time ago, and I should have never let you take the stand anyway. You were a kid. You didn't know what you were doing. But Judy lets her know, I think about it every day, and I'm regretful for it. So after Judy leaves the prison, she goes over to talk to Detective Perez, and she's brought a peace offering of a picture she drew of Flo for Detective Perez. But the real reason she's shown up is because she wants to know if Detective Perez has any idea where her paintings are from TKG Arts. But Detective Perez calls Nick over, and they want to know if Judy knows anything about what Parker showed Nick, which were the pictures that Parker took off Instagram that clearly show Charlie, Parker, Steve's car, and Steve's hat. Judy immediately says it's not what it looks like, but she's having a lot of trouble explaining it. And Detective Perez and Nick want the truth because the police chief is giving them pressure to make an arrest, and he's pointing them in the direction of Judy. But all the evidence right now is pointing to Charlie, and they'd have motive, and they'd clearly have evidence. But Judy reassures him that Charlie had nothing to do with this, although she's not saying anything else. So Judy immediately heads over to Jen's place, and Jen has had quite a day. She started off the morning learning that her stop sign petition got rejected by the city council, so she decided to get the rejection in person. She's headed over to the city council meeting and wants to know why they rejected her stop sign, but the real reason they rejected it is because one of the people on the city council is the guy who didn't know the meaning of no when Jen was trying to find the car. And after Jen brings up safety, he has the audacity to actually say, "It's amazing to me you're bringing up safety when you assaulted me not too long ago." But this is Jen Harding we're talking about, so she puts the guy on blast in a #MeToo moment, letting the entire courtroom know exactly what he did. She also makes mention that maybe if there was a stop sign in the road where her husband was killed, he would still be there today. And then she just drops the mic and walks off stage. And then when she got home, Henry's upset because Shandy told Henry that she's the one who killed his bird. She also told Henry that Jen told her to lie about it. And now Henry feels betrayed by the both of them. And the only person he really wants to talk to and see right now is Judy, but she's not there. And as Jen is leaving Henry's room, she runs into Charlie, who wants some answers. But Jen tells him that Steve was mixed up with some really bad people and basically shut up and don't worry about it. Now Charlie is holding that little toiletry bag that he took from Steve's car, and when Jen asks, "Hey, what is that?" he says, "Oh, never mind, it's nothing." So when Judy finally shows up at Jen's house, Jen is very stressed out. And Judy lets her know that the cops have pictures of Charlie driving around Laguna with Steve's car and the Instagram photos, and they think that Charlie's the one who killed Steve. But she's going to take the fall. And Jen says, "You can't do that." But she says, "I'm not asking, I'm telling you I'm taking the fall." And Judy feels like she has to do this because the night that Steve died, Judy was going to commit suicide. And then she got Jen's phone call. And she feels like she was saved that night to repay the debt. And Jen finally comes clean that you're not the reason why Steve is dead. I killed him. She goes on to explain the reason why she murdered Steve. And one of those nasty comments that we hadn't heard before was Ted wanted out of the relationship so bad that he jumped in front of their car. And that's something that Jen has kind of always felt was true, was that she alienated her husband so badly that he actually jumped in front of a car. She starts bawling her eyes out saying that her husband hated her and her kids hate her and she's just a piece of shit. Now, right after hearing that Jen was the one who murdered Steve, Judy started crying. But then after hearing Jen go on with the story, she feels the need to console Jen. And as Jen is saying how everybody hates her, Judy says, "Well, I never hated you." And Jen says, "Of course you don't. That's because you gravitate to anybody who will give you a little morsel of attention, even if it's abusive attention. That's why you stayed with Steve. That's why you love your mom. It's like you get off on it or something. You'll just stick around for anybody." And as soon as those words come out of her mouth, she knows that she made a mistake. Judy tries to get out of there, but Jen is saying, "No, stop. I'm sorry. Just hit me. Punch me in the face." And as she's begging to get punched, Judy says, "I'm not going to do that. I'm not like you." So Jen then tries to block the car from leaving, but finally Judy screams at the top of her lungs, "Stop it. Just stop it." And she starts hysterically crying. Jen goes to console her and takes her inside and puts her to bed. And then she writes a letter to Charlie, Judy, and Henry, puts the bird that she killed Steve with in the safe along with the gun, takes out a binder, puts all the letters in a binder, and then heads over to Detective Perez's house to turn herself in. So in episode 10, Jen tries to confess to Detective Perez, who's going through a tough time because Michelle moved out. But Detective Perez needs more than just Jen's word that she did it. So the two head to the forest, start looking for where they buried the body, but they can't find that location anywhere. And after searching and searching and searching, Detective Perez just finally calls her over to the car and says, "We're leaving." Because Detective Perez feels like it's just nothing more than a mother trying to protect her child from a crime. Another possibility is that Judy Hale did it, and she's once again trying to pay off Jen. And Detective Perez cannot figure out why so many people are obsessed with Judy Hale. It's like she has a spell on everybody. And Jen says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, she killed your husband and you love her. Like, what is up with that?" And Jen thinks about it and says it's because she sees the good in people. And Judy, meanwhile, has woken up and found the letters and is panicking because she knows that Jen has gone to turn herself in and she's trying to keep it from the kids. But Charlie knows that his mom didn't come home last night and he's worried. He gives Judy the toiletry bag and says that there's a flash drive in there, but some weird language like Hebrew, I couldn't read it. And she says it's Greek. And she gives Charlie a hug and says, "Thank you so much," and then immediately takes it over to Nick. She tells Nick that if I give you what I'm about to give you, I need your word that you'll do everything to protect Jen. The problem is Nick has no idea what she's talking about because Jen hasn't shown up to confess anything. She went straight to Detective Perez's house. So when Nick says, "What are you talking about?" she says, "I mean, just hypothetically speaking, if Jen is ever in trouble, you'll protect her." But Nick isn't really concerned about that at this time, because he heard the voicemails from Steve, and he just wants to know why in the world Judy would stay with a guy like that as opposed to Nick. She says, "I guess I figured you get what you deserve," but he says nobody deserved that. He then picks up one of the items from the bag, and it's a voice recorder. And Judy says, "I listened to that. Make sure you listen to that privately where the chief can't hear himself." And then she leaves. And as Nick is staring at it, he realizes what she just said and goes, "Oh my God." So as Detective Perez and Jen are heading back from the forest, Detective Perez gets a text from Nick saying, "We got him." And at that same moment, Jen says, "All right, what happens now?" She says, "We'll drive back, you'll give a statement, and you'll be formally charged. That's protocol. But you're just going to go home. And we're never going to talk about what we didn't find out in these woods." And Jen is very confused, but Detective Perez says, "I'm not trying to be a cop right now. I just want to be a person. And sometimes justice works itself out. So go home with your kids and tell them you love them." And just as Judy is about to tell both Henry and Charlie what happened to their mom, Jen walks to the door. Because Judy never gave the kids their letters. And the first thing Jen says is, "Let me explain the letters," but Judy lets her know with her eyes that I didn't even give it to her. When Jen and Judy get alone, Jen apologizes for what she said the previous night and also apologizes for lying to her, but Judy forgives her. She tells her, "I don't want to carry around any more pain anymore. I'm tired of it." And really, resenting Jen would just be punishing herself. Afterwards, Judy heads to the prison to talk to her mom, who was kind of hinting at Judy hiring a lawyer for her to get her out. But Judy says, "Yeah, I couldn't find the money to do that." Her mom then says, "You know, it would be great if you just wrote the board a letter saying I've changed." But Judy's not doing that either, because she looks at her mom and says, "You know what, Mom? You haven't changed." And she walks out. When she gets back home, Detective Perez has shown up with all of her paintings. And this is a huge deal to Judy, who thought they were lost forever. And this is really a thank you from Detective Perez, because Judy gave them that bag from Steve's car that indicted the chief. And the chief is going away to federal prison for a long time. And right before Detective Perez leaves, Judy says, "I just want to let you know, I think you're a really special person." And Detective Perez looks right at her dead in the eye and says, "I hope I never see you again." But, that's Judy Hale for you. So with Detective Perez long gone, Judy starts busting open those paintings. Because the reason she wanted them so badly wasn't because she was attached to them. It was because there was money hidden inside the frames. And I'm talking a lot of money. And with all of that money, she decides to buy Lorna out of Jen's house. Initially, Lorna thinks that she's just trying to get bought out of their lives, but Jen says, "No, you're the kid's only grandmother, and I do appreciate that," which is another reason why I can't work for you anymore. Lorna says, "Is it because you just found a $15 and $20 million property?" And Jen says, "No, it's not. And actually, I'm gifting that to you as well." But Jen asks her to be nice to Mrs. Woods because she could really use a friend right now who knows what she's going through. And with Lorna losing Ted and Mrs. Woods probably losing Steve, the two would get along great. And in all honesty, with a $20 million commission, Lorna's going to get along great with anybody. And speaking of the Woods, Ben is packing up the house along with his mom, and his mom makes mention that Jen was asking about him and that he should call her before he leaves town. So he goes into a separate room and is looking at the number, and right before he's about to call it, he gets a phone call. And the phone call lets him know that Steve's body's been found in the woods by a hiker's dog. But instead of telling his mom, he just says, "I'm going to go get us some ice cream," and leaves. And he doesn't go to get ice cream. He goes to the liquor store and grabs a bottle. Jen and Judy, meanwhile, have taken the rest of Judy's money to go get Charlie a car. And with Jen and Judy out of the house, Charlie sneaks into Judy's room to try to get some weed. But he finds Jen's letter to Judy. And in that letter, Jen states, "I'm sorry for not forgiving you sooner for Ted." So now Charlie knows, or at least has an idea of what happened and who killed his father. As Jen and Judy are driving back from the car dealership, they start talking about how they might take a vacation. But as they're doing so, they need to slam on the brakes, because the city council has put in that stop sign that Jen was fighting so hard to get. And as they're celebrating their little moral victory, they inch out into the intersection, but they're hit because some guy blew that stop sign. And as Judy is asking Jen if she's okay because the car was hit on the driver's side, Ben, who was the driver who hit Jen, is drunk and he's realizing what he did, and he backs up the car and he does a hit and run. And that is how Season 2 of Dead to Me ends. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button harder than Ben hit Jen's new car. Too soon, I apologize. If you thought this video sucked, there's a thumbs down button. You can hit that as well. If you leave a comment and I don't get back to you, it's because I avoid the comment section. But I do really appreciate you guys checking out this video.